The fields know my name. My parents left on a Thursday morning. I remember the exact sound of the gravel crunching under the tires of their SUV as they pulled away from the farmhouse. The noise echoed longer than usual, rolling across the empty fields like a warning. I stood on the front porch, arms wrapped around myself, watching the dust rise and slowly settle back onto the dirt road. They were going on a week-long trip, a late anniversary vacation. They told me I'd be fine on my own. I was 21 after all, old enough to handle a quiet farmhouse surrounded by acres of cornfields and pastures. "Nothing ever happens out here," my dad had said. That was the problem. Nothing ever happened out here. The farmhouse sat miles from the nearest neighbor. Just land, fences, and fields stretching endlessly in every direction. The corn stood tall that year, thick and dense, rustling even when there was no wind. At night, the fields whispered to themselves. I stayed outside until the sound of the car was completely gone. Then I went inside and locked the door. The first day passed uneventfully. I cleaned the house, fed the animals, and tried to distract myself with music and chores. I kept telling myself I was being dramatic. I had lived here my whole life. I knew every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old farmhouse settling into itself. Still, I checked the locks twice before bed. That night, I dreamed someone was standing in the fields, calling my name. The second night, I heard footsteps. It was close to midnight when I noticed them. Slow, careful, crunching against gravel. I froze in my bed, heart pounding. We had gravel paths around the house. Anyone walking on them would be impossible to miss. I held my breath and listened. Step, pause, step. They circled the house. I slid out of bed and crept to the window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The yard was empty. The porch light illuminated nothing but moths and dust. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon, a deer. But animals don't walk like that. The next morning I found footprints. They were near the back door, pressed deep into the damp soil. Large, heavy. The pattern of the boot tread was sharp, as if the person had stood there for a long time, facing the door. I stared at them until my stomach twisted into knots. I called my parents. No signal. I didn't sleep the third night. Around 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message contained only 3 words. "You're still there." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Another message came through. "You haven't changed." I blocked the number. That was when I heard the tapping. It came from the kitchen window. Soft, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone knocking with a fingernail. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The tapping stopped. A voice followed. Low, male. "I know you're awake." I recognized it instantly. Evan. I hadn't seen Evan Miller since high school. He was quiet back then. Awkward. Always watching from the corners of rooms. He used to sit behind me in class, close enough that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck when he leaned forward. He used to leave notes in my locker. "You don't know how special you are. We're meant to be close. I watch over you." I reported him once. Nothing came of it. After graduation, he disappeared. Until now. "I just want to talk," Evan said through the glass. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching my phone like a weapon. "Go away," I whispered. "I've waited a long time," he replied. "Your parents always around, always in the way." My blood ran cold. You shouldn't be alone, he continued. It's dangerous out here. I screamed. The tapping turned into pounding. I ran to the bedroom and locked the door. The house shook as Evan tried the windows, the doors, testing them one by one. You can't hide from me, he called out. The fields tell me where you are. Something scraped against the siding. A ladder. The window shattered. Glass exploded inward as Evan forced his way inside. I bolted for the hallway, slipping on broken shards, my feet burning with pain. He laughed, a broken, delighted sound. Don't run, he said. I just want to keep you safe. I grabbed the shotgun my father kept above the fireplace. My hands barely knew what to do, but instinct took over. Evan stopped. For the first time, he hesitated. You wouldn't, he said softly. I pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening. Evan screamed and collapsed, clutching his shoulder. He didn't die. He crawled, dragging himself toward me, leaving a dark smear across the hardwood floor. You're mine, he gasped. You always were. I ran, out the front door, into the fields. The corn closed around me like a living thing. Leaves sliced at my skin. The air was thick and hot, filled with the sound of my own ragged breathing. I ran blindly, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. Behind me, I heard him, dragging himself, laughing. You can't escape, his voice echoed. This place belongs to us. I tripped and fell hard. The earth knocked the air from my lungs. A shadow loomed over me, then sirens. Red and blue lights cut through the darkness. Evan vanished into the fields. They never found him. But sometimes at night, when the wind moves through the corn just right, I hear footsteps, and a voice whispering my name. They were already living there. The house wasn't just big. It was unreal. The kind of place most people only ever saw in movies or glossy magazines. A massive luxury estate planted right in the middle of farmland that stretched for miles in every direction. Rolling green fields, private woods, a vineyard, barns that looked more expensive than most people's homes, and a mansion so large it had wings the staff barely used. The family who owned it were old money, quietly rich, the kind of rich that didn't need to prove anything. And when they decided to fly overseas for a long weekend, they asked their grandson to watch the place. His name was Ethan, and he was 20 years old. To him, it felt like winning the lottery. Ethan arrived Friday afternoon with a duffel bag, his gaming console, and a grin he couldn't wipe off his face. The moment his grandparents' car disappeared down the long stone driveway, the silence hit him. Not an uncomfortable silence, more like freedom. The house felt different without them. Bigger, wilder, like it finally belonged to someone young. He walked through the halls in awe, even though he'd been there dozens of times before. The private theater, the indoor pool, the gym, the wine cellar, off limits. The kitchen with fridges bigger than his apartment back home. Everything a 20-year-old could dream of. His instructions were simple. Lock the doors at night. Don't invite anyone over. Call security if something seems off. Ethan nodded, barely listening. Nothing ever happened out here. The first day was perfect. He blasted music through the house, explored rooms he'd never been allowed into, and filled the kitchen counter with snacks like a kid let loose in a candy store. He spent hours gaming on a massive projector screen, controller vibrating in his hands as explosions echoed through the mansion. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the fields gold. That was when he noticed movement near the back of the property. Two figures, walking slowly near one of the old storage buildings. Ethan paused the game and squinted. They looked rough, clothes layered and dirty, hair long and unkempt. They moved like people who didn't want to be noticed, but weren't very good at it. Farmhands, he assumed. The estate always had workers coming and going. Gardeners, maintenance crews, temporary help. Ethan shrugged and went back to his game. That night he slept like a rock. The second day he noticed them again. The same two people, closer this time. One stood near the orchard. The other disappeared behind the barn. They never looked toward the house directly, just enough to make it seem accidental. Ethan watched from a second-floor window, curiosity prickling at the back of his mind. They didn't look like workers. No uniforms. No tools. Still, he brushed it off. You're alone in a massive house, he told himself. You're just jumpy. He turned the music up louder. What Ethan didn't know, what the family didn't know, was that the estate had rooms no one ever used. Old servant quarters. Storage wings sealed off decades ago. Utility rooms buried beneath the west wing. Places untouched because the family never had time to look around the way normal people would. And that was where they had been living. The two homeless strangers had found the place months ago. Paradise hidden in plain sight. Warm, dry. Endless food scraps from staff kitchens. Water, shelter, silence. And when they saw the owners leave with suitcases, they thought the house was finally empty. That night, Ethan went all out. He cooked a ridiculous amount of food, ate straight from the fridge, drank soda until his stomach hurt, and played games at a volume that shook the walls. Music blasted. Screens glowed. Laughter echoed. He didn't hear the footsteps, didn't hear the whispers, didn't notice the lights flicker when someone tampered with a breaker downstairs. The first sound that broke through the noise was a thud. Not loud, not sudden, just wrong. Ethan paused the game. Another sound followed. Metal scraping metal. His smile faded. He muted everything. The house settled into an unnatural quiet. Then, a door creaked. From somewhere below, Ethan's heart began to pound. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing far too loudly. No answer. He told himself it was the house. Old pipes, old wood. But then he heard breathing. Not his. They moved carefully now. Too carefully. One of them tested a door. Slowly. Gently. The kind of movement made by someone who didn't want to alert whoever might be inside. Ethan grabbed his phone. No signal. The Wi-Fi cut out. Then the power died. Darkness swallowed the mansion. A flashlight beam swept across the hallway below. Ethan backed away, pulse screaming in his ears. He heard a voice. Low. Hoarse. "He's here." Another voice responded, closer. "Too loud. Stupid kid." They laughed. Ethan ran, barefoot down a side hallway, into a room he barely remembered. A locked recreational storage space his grandparents never used. He slammed the door behind him and held it shut, trying to steady his breathing. Footsteps approached. Slow. Patient. A shadow passed beneath the door. The handle rattled. "Come on out." One of them whispered. "You don't belong here." Ethan's fear began to twist into something else. Anger. This was his family's house. They didn't belong here. When the door burst open, Ethan was ready. He didn't scream. He didn't freeze. He swung. The metal golf club connected with bone. One of the strangers collapsed instantly. The other lunged. Ethan fought like someone with nothing left to lose. The house echoed with grunts, crashes, and the sound of furniture breaking. Years of pent-up rage, fear, and adrenaline poured out of him. He overpowered them not because he was stronger, but because he was angrier. When it was over, they lay still on the floor, breathing, barely. Morning light spilled through the shattered windows. Ethan sat on the staircase, shaking, blood on his hands that wasn't all his. The police would later say the men had been living in the house for months, that they planned to take him, that he was lucky, but Ethan never told them everything. He never told them how natural it felt when the fear faded, how quiet the house finally seemed, how, for a moment, it felt like the estate had chosen him. When his grandparents returned, Ethan handed the keys back with a calm smile. He didn't mention the hidden rooms, or the feeling that something in the walls was still watching, because now he knew something important. The house didn't belong to the richest people. It belonged to whoever was willing to fight for it. They knew I was alone. I was 19 when I learned how loud silence could be. The farmhouse sat at the edge of miles and miles of land. Fields, barns, silos, and fences disappearing into the horizon. During the day, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But once the sun went down, the quiet didn't feel natural anymore. It felt intentional, like the world was holding its breath. I had been hired to look after the place while the family who owned it went on a 2-week trip overseas. They needed someone to feed the animals, keep an eye on the house, and make sure nothing went wrong. I needed the money, and I told myself I was old enough to handle it. I was wrong. The family left on a Monday morning. I watched their car disappear down the dirt road, the sound of the engine fading until there was nothing left but wind moving through the crops. That was when I realized something important. I was completely alone. The farmhouse was old. Not charming old, tired old. The floors creaked even when no one walked on them. The walls popped and groaned as if something inside them was shifting. Every sound echoed too long, like the house wanted me to notice it. There were 2 hired farm workers who stayed on the property during the day. Their names were Caleb and Ross. They were brothers, or cousins. I was never sure. They were both in their late 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet in a way that made conversation feel one-sided. The family had introduced them briefly before leaving, assuring me they were trustworthy. "They've worked here for years," the father said. "You'll be safe." Caleb smiled at me. Ross didn't. The first few days were uneventful. I followed the list the family left behind. Feed the chickens at sunrise. Check the locks. Keep the lights on at night. Don't wander too far from the house after dark. Caleb and Ross arrived every morning in the same dusty truck. They'd work the fields, repair fences, and disappear again by late afternoon. They barely spoke to me, but I noticed things. The way their eyes lingered too long. The way they always seemed to know where I was on the property. The way they asked questions that felt unnecessary. "You sleep upstairs or downstairs?" Ross asked one morning. "Parents know you're alone?" Caleb asked another day. I laughed them off. I shouldn't have. On the 4th night, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. Slow, deliberate, not pacing, not wandering, waiting. I stayed perfectly still, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heart beat so loudly I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. After several minutes, the footsteps moved away. The next morning, I found boot prints beneath my window. 2 sets. I told myself it was paranoia, but the feeling in my stomach never went away. That afternoon, Caleb lingered longer than usual. He leaned against the porch railing, watching me lock the door behind them as Ross climbed into the truck. "Big place," Caleb said casually. "Must feel lonely at night." I didn't respond. He smiled again. The next evening, the power went out. No storm, no wind, just darkness. The farmhouse plunged into silence so complete it rang in my ears. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the breaker box. Everything was fine. The power didn't come back on. I tried my phone. No signal. That was when I heard a knock. 3 slow taps on the front door. I froze. The knock came again. "Hey!" Ross's voice called out. "Something wrong with the power?" I didn't answer. "We just wanted to check on you," Caleb added. The doorknob twisted. Locked. They laughed softly. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, the power returned as suddenly as it had gone. When Caleb and Ross arrived later that morning, they acted like nothing had happened. But Ross had scratches on his hands. The 6th day was the worst. I caught them watching the house from the field. Not working, just standing there, staring. When I went inside, I locked every door and window. I pulled the curtains shut. My phone finally got a signal and I tried calling the family. No answer. At sunset, I heard the barn door slam shut. Then footsteps, running, toward the house. They broke in through the back. The sound of splintering would echoed through the kitchen as the door burst open. I screamed and ran upstairs, my feet slipping on the stairs as Caleb's voice shouted my name. "You don't need to be scared," he called. "We're just taking you somewhere safe." Ross laughed. I locked myself in the bedroom, pushing furniture against the door. My hands shook as I called the police. The line rang and rang. The door shook as they threw their weight against it. "You knew we'd be alone," Ross said through the wood. "We waited for this." The door cracked. I climbed out the window. I ran barefoot across the field, the earth cold and sharp beneath my feet. Behind me, I heard them shouting, laughing, chasing. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stop. I reached the old grain silo at the edge of the property and hid inside, pressing myself against the cold metal wall, trying not to breathe. Their voices passed by. Close, too close. Then sirens, lights, the sound of engines. They ran. The police found me hours later, shaking and bleeding. Caleb and Ross were gone. The farmhouse was empty. The family never returned. I don't know where the brothers went, but sometimes, when I drive past farms at night, I see 2 figures standing in the fields, watching, waiting, and I know they remember me. A few minutes apart. Out where the land never ends, distance is measured differently. A few minutes can mean everything. Out on the farms, a few minutes is the difference between lights in the distance and nothing but darkness. Between knowing help exists and realizing you're completely on your own. Between hearing another engine on the road and knowing no one is coming. That was the distance between the 2 houses. Just a few minutes. And it was the reason everything went wrong. The 2 families had been neighbors for decades. Both were wealthy farmers, owning massive properties carved out of the countryside. thousands of acres of crops, cattle, heavy equipment, private dirt roads, and old hunting woods that no one outside the families ever stepped into. Their farms sat like islands in an ocean of fields, connected by gravel roads and worn trails only locals knew how to navigate. The parents trusted the land. They trusted the quiet. And they trusted their sons. Ethan Hale and Connor Briggs grew up together. They weren't just friends. They were closer than brothers. They learned to drive on tractors before cars, learned to shoot before they learned algebra, and memorized every fence line, ditch, and shortcut between the two farms before they were old enough to stay out after dark. They were inseparable. Their houses sat only a few minutes apart by road, less if you cut through the fields on a four-wheeler. They had done it 1,000 times. Nothing had ever happened. So when both sets of parents announced they were leaving the state for a short 2-night trip, neither family worried. "Just the weekend," Connor's dad said. "You boys will be fine. Call if anything feels off," Ethan's mother added. Already halfway out the door, the parents left early Friday morning. By noon, both farmhouses were quiet. Too quiet. The boys already had a plan. They called their girlfriends, Maddie and Claire, and invited them out to the farms. The idea was simple. Spend both nights together, switching houses, just like they had talked about doing for years but never had the chance. Friday night at Ethan's house. Saturday night at Connor's. At around 3 a.m., each couple would drive back to their original home before sunrise chores. Easy, safe, familiar. Friday night felt like freedom. Music played through Ethan's farmhouse, echoing down long hallways. They cooked too much food, stayed up late, and laughed louder than they ever would if the parents were home. Outside, the fields stretched endlessly under the moonlight, wind brushing through the crops like distant whispers. Nothing seemed wrong. At exactly 3:07 a.m., Connor and Claire grabbed their things and drove home. Their headlights disappeared down the gravel road, swallowed by the darkness. Ethan watched until the light was gone. Then he locked the door. Saturday felt different. Not bad, just heavy. The kind of day where the sky stays gray longer than it should, and the air feels thick even though nothing's wrong. Ethan noticed tire tracks near the far fence line that didn't belong to any of their equipment. Connor mentioned hearing something moving near the tree line the night before, long after he and Claire had gone to bed. They laughed it off. Farm noises. Animals. Nothing else made sense. Saturday night was at Connor's house. The farmhouse there was older, bigger, and sat closer to the woods. The nearest road curved away just far enough that headlights couldn't be seen from the windows. When the sun went down, the darkness pressed in tighter around the house. They turned the music up anyway. By midnight, they were relaxed again, eating, joking, sprawled across couches like the world outside didn't exist. That was when Ethan checked the time. 2:38 a.m. "Probably should head back soon," he said casually. Connor nodded. "Yeah, let's wrap it up." No one wanted to admit they were uneasy. At 2:55 a.m., they stepped outside. The air was unnaturally still. No insects, no wind, no distant cattle noises, just silence. Connor unlocked his truck. Ethan did the same. They hugged their girlfriends goodbye, promised to text when they got home, and pulled onto the gravel road. Ethan and Maddie went first. Connor and Claire followed a minute later. Ethan made it home without incident. But the moment he pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. The porch light was off. He always left it on. The barn door was open. He hadn't touched it. Ethan's chest tightened. He tried calling Connor. No signal. Meanwhile, Connor's truck rolled down the dark gravel road toward his own house. Less than halfway there, his headlights caught something unnatural. Stones. Big ones. Placed deliberately across the road. Not scattered. Stacked. Connor slowed instinctively. Claire felt her stomach drop. "No one puts rocks like that accidentally," she whispered. Connor eased the truck forward, carefully navigating around them. That was the point. The stones weren't meant to stop him. They were meant to slow him down. As Connor cleared the last stone, Claire looked ahead. The house came into view, and so did movement. Two figures, running from the side of the house, carrying something heavy. Connor slammed the accelerator. "Someone's there," Claire screamed. The figures disappeared into the fields. Back at Ethan's farm, his unease turned into fear. He grabbed the rifle from the rack by the door. Not loaded, just in case, and stepped outside. The night felt wrong. Too open. Too quiet. Then he heard it. An engine. Connor's truck, racing toward the house. They met in the driveway, headlights crossing. "Someone was at my place," Connor said, breathless. "They set a trap on the road." Ethan's blood ran cold. "They're at mine," he said. "Or they were." Clicked instantly. Thieves. They knew the parents were gone. They just didn't know the boys would be moving between houses. They didn't call the police. Not yet. They knew the land better than anyone. And they knew the thieves were on foot. They ran to the shed. Two four-wheelers roared to life, engines ripping through the silence as they tore across the fields, headlights bouncing wildly over uneven ground. The chase was chaos. The thieves ran blindly, cutting through crops and fences, thinking the darkness would protect them. Didn't. Ethan and Connor cut them off near the woods, using trails they'd ridden since childhood. One thief tripped and fell hard. The other disappeared into the trees. Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised the rifle. One shot. The man screamed as the bullet shattered his leg. He crawled into the woods, dragging himself into the darkness. And then he was gone. The night went silent again. No movement, no voices, just heavy breathing and the hum of cooling engines. They didn't chase him. The woods at night weren't just dangerous. They felt wrong. Morning came slowly. Police arrived. Parents came rushing back early. Search teams spread out across the land. They found the wounded thief the next morning, a mile down the road. Alive. Barely. His leg ruined. His eyes hollow. He refused to speak. The other thief was never found. Even now, people say someone still moves through those woods at night, watching, waiting, learning the land. Because out there, a few minutes can mean everything.